The night shimmered with quiet extravagance. Beneath towering crystal chandeliers, the grand ballroom glowed in waves of golden light, each reflection dancing across polished marble floors like liquid gold. Every detail had been curated to perfection, from the cascading white orchids lining the walls to the soft hum of a live string quartet playing near the elevated stage. Outside, a long line of luxury cars pulled up one after another, their doors opening to reveal the city's most powerful figures. Inside, the air carried a blend of expensive perfume, aged wine, and ambition. "Make sure the press stays behind the velvet line," one of the event hosts whispered sharply into his earpiece, adjusting his cufflinks as he scanned the entrance. Clusters of guests moved gracefully across the room, their voices low but purposeful. "Did you hear? The board finalized the deal this morning," a man in a tailored tuxedo murmured, swirling his glass. His companions smirked. At this level, deals are just formalities. Power is what matters. Near the entrance, security personnel stood like statues, alert, expressionless, watching every movement with trained precision. Nothing about the night was left to chance. At the center of it all stood the grand staircase, sweeping down into the ballroom like a stage waiting for its next performer. Every arriving guest seemed to pause at the top for just a moment, allowing the room to take them in to acknowledge their presence. Cameras flashed. Names were announced. Status was silently measured. And before we go any further, if you enjoy cinematic stories like this, stories filled with power, drama, and unexpected twists, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because what's about to unfold will change everything. A woman in a shimmering silver gown descended the stairs, drawing a wave of admiration. "Impressive turnout tonight," she said with a confident smile as she approached a small group near the champagne bar. "Only the most influential," someone replied. "If you're here, you matter." But beneath the elegance, there was something else. Something unspoken. A tension. An invisible hierarchy that dictated who belonged and who didn't. The music swelled slightly, filling the space between conversations, as waitstaff glided effortlessly through the crowd with trays of sparkling drinks. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. And as the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened once more, quietly, almost unnoticed, it marked the arrival of someone who would soon disrupt the delicate balance of power that this room so carefully maintained. The night was just beginning. The grand doors closed softly behind her, so quietly that no one noticed at first. While the ballroom glittered with diamonds, designer gowns, and tailored tuxedos, she stood in stark contrast. Her dress was simple, elegant, but understated. No heavy embellishments, no flashing jewelry. Just a clean silhouette, soft fabric, and a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, yet somehow carried its own presence. For a brief moment, she paused near the entrance. Her eyes moved across the room, not with awe, but with awareness. As if she wasn't taking in the luxury, but measuring it. A passing waiter hesitated slightly before offering her a glass of champagne. She gave a small, polite smile. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice calm, steady. But as she stepped further inside, the shift began. At first, it was subtle. A glance held just a second too long. A whisper behind a raised hand. "Do you know her?" A woman in a deep emerald gown asked her companion, her brow slightly furrowed. He shook his head. "No idea, but she doesn't look like she belongs here." Another voice, lower this time. "Maybe someone's plus one." A quiet chuckle followed. The woman continued walking, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She passed clusters of guests who instinctively made space, not out of respect, but uncertainty. The music played on. Conversations continued. But now something had shifted. Near the grand staircase, she stopped briefly, her gaze lifting toward the cascading lights above. For a fleeting second, there was something reflective in her eyes, almost personal. Then it was gone. "Excuse me." A man stepped slightly into her path, offering a polite but guarded smile. "Are you on the guest list?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "I am," she replied simply. There was no explanation.
No elaboración.
Just certainty. The man nodded, though his confusion lingered as he stepped aside. As she moved deeper into the room, the whispers grew quieter, but sharper. Because in a place where everyone wore their status like armor, her simplicity felt disruptive, unexplainable, and dangerous. Across the ballroom, unnoticed by her, a pair of eyes had already locked onto her presence. Watching, assessing, the kind of gaze that didn't question, it judged. And in a room built on power and perception, that kind of attention rarely ended well. The atmosphere in the ballroom subtly changed the moment he arrived. It wasn't announced loudly at first. There was no need. People felt it before they saw it. Conversations softened. Laughter dimmed. Even the live music seemed to hesitate for half a beat, as if acknowledging a shift in gravity. Then he appeared. A man in a flawlessly tailored black suit stepped through the entrance with slow, deliberate confidence. His presence wasn't just noticed, it was absorbed by the room. Every movement he made carried control, as if the space itself adjusted to accommodate him. Mr. Zayden Malik has arrived. A host finally announced, voice tightening slightly. Heads turned instantly. Whispers followed like a ripple through water. That's him. He runs half the major contracts in the region. I heard even ministers wait for his approval. Zayden Malik didn't smile. He didn't need to. He walked forward with two associates behind him, men equally sharp in appearance, but clearly secondary in presence. One carried a sleek tablet, the other whispered occasional updates into his ear. Zayden barely reacted. He simply absorbed information like it was background noise. At the center of the ballroom, he paused. His gaze swept across the crowd slowly, measured, calculating. People straightened instinctively. A few even lowered their eyes. He accepted a glass of whiskey from a passing server without looking at him. Too warm, Zayden said flatly, handing it back within seconds. The server froze, then quickly retreated. A soft chuckle came from one of his associates. They still don't get your standards, sir. They don't need to, Zayden replied, voice calm but cutting. They just need to follow them. Nearby, a group of socialites tried to engage him. Mr. Malik, it's an honor to have you here tonight, one woman said, offering a practiced smile. He looked at her for barely a second. Is it? He replied, tone indifferent. The smile faltered. He continued walking without waiting for a response. Behind him, the crowd reacted in silence, some impressed, others unsettled, all aware of the same truth. Zayden Malik didn't participate in social hierarchies. He defined them. As he reached the upper platform overlooking the ballroom, his eyes scanned the crowd again, slower this time. And then he stopped. Something or someone had caught his attention. Down below, near the edge of the grand staircase, stood a woman in a simple dress. Different, unassuming, and completely out of place in his world. Zayden's expression didn't change. But for the first time that night, his gaze lingered. The music continued to play, but something about the air had changed. It was subtle at first, an invisible tension stretching across the ballroom like a tightening wire. Conversations near the grand staircase slowed. Glasses paused midair. Even the laughter faded into uneasy silence as attention quietly shifted toward one point. Zayden Malik was moving. Slowly, deliberately. His polished shoes echoed faintly against the marble floor as he descended from the upper platform. Each step felt intentional, like he was closing distance not just physically but socially, emotionally, dominantly. His associates stopped behind him without a word. They knew better than to follow further. Below, the woman stood near the edge of the staircase, still composed, still unreadable. Zayden stopped just a few feet away from her. For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between them felt louder than the entire ballroom. You're not on the guest list I approved, he said finally, his voice calm, but sharp underneath. A few nearby guests stiffened, pretending not to listen while clearly listening. The woman turned slightly toward him. Her expression didn't change. I didn't know I needed your approval to attend an event, she replied softly. A flicker, just a flicker, crossed Zayden's face. Not anger. Interest. Something colder. This isn't an open gathering, he said. People here are important. Connected.
Known.
She met his gaze fully now. And you believe importance is something written on a name tag? A faint murmur spread through the crowd. Someone whispered, "She's asking for trouble." Zayden took one step closer. The space between them tightened. "Listen carefully," he said, voice lower now. "Events like this are not for guessing games. One wrong presence can disrupt everything." She didn't move. Neither did she blink. "I'm not disrupting anything," she said. "You are just uncomfortable with what you can't categorize." That sentence landed heavier than expected. A few guests exchanged uncertain looks. Zayden studied her now, not as a mistake, not as an intrusion, but as an anomaly. "You still haven't answered my question," he said. "Who invited you?" A pause. The chandelier light shimmered above them, reflecting in her calm eyes. "I was invited," she said simply. "By whom?" he pressed. Another silence. Longer this time. But she offered no name.
No explanation.
Only quiet certainty. Around them, the ballroom felt frozen, caught between curiosity and fear. People sensed it now. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a collision forming in real time. Zayden exhaled slowly, as if deciding something. "This ends one way or another," he said quietly. And as he turned slightly toward his associates, the room unknowingly held its breath, waiting for the moment that would shift everything. The silence in the ballroom was no longer subtle. It was heavy, oppressive, as if the entire room had collectively forgotten how to breathe. All eyes were fixed on the confrontation near the grand staircase, the woman in the simple dress and Zayden Malik standing before her like a judge preparing a verdict no one asked for, but everyone feared to hear. Zayden's expression had changed now. The curiosity was gone. So was patience. Only authority remained. "You've had your chance to explain yourself," he said coldly, his voice cutting through the stillness. "But you insist on standing here as if you belong." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone instinctively raised a phone. Another followed. Screens lit up quietly in the dim glow of chandeliers. The woman didn't step back. She didn't plead. She simply looked at him, calm, steady, unshaken. That calmness irritated him more than resistance ever could. "You think silence gives you status?" Zayden continued, stepping closer. "People like you confuse confidence with permission." "People like me?" she repeated softly. For a fraction of a second, something shifted in her tone, but it wasn't fear. It was restraint. Before anyone could register what was happening, Zayden's hand moved. Fast, decisive. A sharp sound echoed through the ballroom as fabric tore. The woman's dress was ripped at the shoulder seam, pulling the elegant simplicity into sudden disarray. Gasps erupted instantly. "Oh my God, did he just?" Someone stop this. A few guests stumbled backward. One woman covered her mouth in shock. Multiple phones were now openly recording, capturing every second of the moment unfolding like a nightmare no one could interrupt. The woman froze for a heartbeat, not from pain, from disbelief. But even then she did not fall. She did not scream. Zayden stepped back slightly, looking at her as if he had corrected an error. "This is what happens," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "when people forget where they stand. You don't belong in spaces like this." The words landed like a blow across the entire room. But instead of chaos, there was only stunned silence. Because what had just happened wasn't just an insult. It was a public declaration. A line had been crossed, irreversibly. The woman slowly lifted her gaze. And for the first time that night, the calm in her eyes didn't feel passive anymore. It felt contained, controlled, dangerous in a way no one yet understood. As security hesitated and guests whispered in disbelief, the atmosphere shifted again, subtly, but unmistakably. Not toward resolution, but toward consequence. The aftermath did not explode. It froze. The ballroom, once alive with music and laughter, had collapsed into an unsettling silence, so deep it almost felt physical. Even the crystal chandeliers above seemed to glow more dimly, as if unwilling to witness what had just unfolded. All eyes remained locked on the woman standing near the grand staircase. Her dress, torn at the shoulder, shifted slightly with every subtle movement of air, but she did not move away. She did not cover herself. She did not retreat. She simply stood there, composed, still, unshaken. Zaydin Malik remained a few steps away, his expression unreadable. His associates had gone rigid behind him, suddenly unsure whether they should intervene or remain silent. Even they seemed to sense that something had shifted beyond their control. Around them, guests whispered in fragments. Someone needs to stop this. This is going too far. Why isn't security doing anything? But security was there. Two guards near the staircase exchanged uncertain glances. One instinctively shifted forward, then paused. His gaze moved from Zaydin to the woman and back again, hesitation tightening his posture. This isn't in the protocol, he muttered under his breath. What protocol? The other guard replied quietly. When the man who owns half the board is standing there? That was the truth, no one said aloud. Power had blurred the rules. A staff member rushed forward slightly, then stopped himself mid-step, clearly torn between duty and consequence. He looked toward the event host for direction. The host, pale-faced, simply shook his head once. Barely noticeable.
No intervention.
Not yet. The woman finally lowered her gaze, not in defeat, but in reflection. Slowly, she adjusted the torn fabric at her shoulder with quiet precision, as if even humiliation had to be handled with dignity. When she looked up again, her eyes were different. Not emotional, not shaken, but sharper, measured. Across the room, someone's phone continued recording, capturing every second of the stillness that followed the act. No one stopped them now. Zaydin exhaled slowly, as if expecting a reaction that never came. That absence of reaction unsettled the room even more than the act itself. Because humiliation was supposed to break people. But she wasn't breaking. She was waiting. And in that silence, heavy, stretched, unbearable, the entire ballroom began to feel it. This wasn't the end of the moment. It was the pause before something far more irreversible. The heavy silence of the ballroom was suddenly shattered, not by shouting, not by music, but by the sharp sound of urgent footsteps echoing through the marble corridors. From the far entrance, a group of high-level executives entered the hall in a hurry. Their presence was immediate, distinct, unignorable. Security straightened instantly, confused by the sudden escalation. Guests turned their heads, sensing that something far above their understanding was unfolding. Clear the path, one of the executives ordered firmly, not looking at anyone in particular. The crowd instinctively parted. And then they saw her. The woman standing near the staircase, still calm, still composed, despite everything that had happened moments ago. The lead executive stopped directly in front of her. His posture shifted instantly, from authority to respect. Miss Alina, he said, his voice steady but carefully controlled. We were informed of the situation immediately. A wave of confusion spread through the guests. Alina. The name sounded simple, but it carried weight in a way no one yet understood. Zaydin's expression tightened slightly. For the first time that night, uncertainty crossed his face. One of the executives turned toward him briefly. Mr. Malik, he said coldly, step aside. Zaydin didn't move. What is going on here? He demanded, his voice lower now. No one answered him directly. Instead, the lead executive turned back to Alina. With your permission, he said respectfully, we will address this publicly. Alina remained silent for a moment. Then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That single gesture changed everything. The executive turned toward the room. And when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that silenced even breath itself. This woman, he said clearly, is the rightful owner and primary shareholder of the entire Atlas Meridian Group. A pause. A collective stillness, so absolute it felt unreal. The same company, he continued, that is hosting this event. The same company that employs many of you. And the same company whose decisions you all depend on. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones that had been recording moments ago now lowered slowly, in disbelief. Zaydin's jaw tightened. No, someone. The words still hung in the air like a shockwave that refused to fade. the rightful owner of Atlas Meridian Group. For a brief moment, the ballroom felt unreal, like time itself had paused just to let the truth sink in. The same guests who had whispered, judged, and recorded now stood frozen, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief to quiet horror at what they had witnessed moments earlier. Zayden Malik did not move. At first, his gaze remained locked on Alina, as if refusing to accept the reality forming around him. The confidence that once defined his presence, sharp, unshakable, absolute, began to fracture in silence. "No," he finally said, but it came out weaker than intended, almost uncertain. One of the executives stepped slightly forward. "Mr. Malik," he said firmly, "you are not authorized to question, detain, or, especially, publicly assault the owner of this organization." The word assault landed heavily. Zayden's fingers tightened slightly at his side. The same man who had walked through this room as if it belonged to him now looked exposed. Alina finally turned her gaze fully toward him. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with calm precision. That calmness unsettled him more than any accusation could. "You were very confident earlier," she said quietly, her voice steady but carrying effortlessly through the silence. "You seemed certain about who belongs where." Zayden swallowed, his jaw tightening. "This was a misunderstanding," he said quickly, trying to regain control. "I was unaware of your identity." "Stop," she interrupted softly. Just one word, but it cut through everything. The room didn't move. No one breathed loudly enough to be heard. Alina took a slow step forward. Not aggressive, not rushed, but deliberate. "You didn't make a mistake because you didn't know who I was," she continued. "You made a mistake because you believed it didn't matter." A pause. Zayden's eyes flickered, something between anger and realization beginning to surface. She looked at him for a moment longer, then added calmly, "That is the difference between power and arrogance." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with consequence. For the first time, Zayden looked around the room, not at people he commanded, but at witnesses to his collapse. Phones were still recording. Faces were no longer admiring. They were judging. His authority had not just weakened. It had reversed. Alina stopped in front of him, maintaining a calm distance. And in that stillness, without raising her voice or changing her expression, she became the only person in the room who no longer needed to prove anything. The balance of power had shifted completely, and Zayden Malik was finally beginning to understand what that meant. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom, and Zayden Malik, who once commanded the room with effortless dominance, now stood at its center as everything around him shifted against his favor. The executives did not raise their voices. They didn't need to. One of them stepped forward, holding a sleek black folder. "Effective immediately," he said firmly. "Your advisory position with Malik Holdings and all affiliated contracts under Atlas Meridian Group are suspended pending internal investigation." A sharp inhale spread through the crowd. Suspended. Not debated. Not discussed. Delivered. Zayden's eyes flicked toward the document, then back to Alina, as if searching for some reversal, some correction to reality itself. But there was none. Security personnel moved in closer. Not aggressively, but decisively. "Sir," one of the guards said quietly, avoiding direct eye contact, "we need you to step outside." For a moment, Zayden didn't respond. His pride fought silently against the situation unfolding around him. But the room had already decided. Whispers replaced admiration. Phones that once captured his confidence now captured his downfall. A woman near the bar murmured, "He really thought he owned this place." Another replied softly, "He did until tonight." Zayden straightened his jacket instinctively, a final attempt to reclaim dignity. "This is being handled incorrectly," he said, voice controlled but strained. "I have influence. This can be resolved." "No," one of the executives interrupted sharply. The word was final. Alina remained still, watching without expression. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Just clarity. Security stepped closer again, this time placing a respectful but firm hand near his arm. "Please," the guard repeated, "this way." Zayden looked around one last time. The guests who once nodded at him now looked away. The people who once feared him now simply observed. And that shift, silent, irreversible, hit harder than any accusation. He exhaled slowly. Then, without another word, he allowed himself to be escorted forward. As he walked past the long line of guests, the silence followed him like a shadow.
No applause.
No resistance. Only the quiet weight of realization settling across the room. At the exit, the grand doors opened again, revealing the night outside, colder, quieter, indifferent. And just before stepping out, Zayden glanced back one final time. Alina was still standing at the center of it all, unmoved, unshaken. And for the first time, he understood the difference between being seen and being powerless. The doors closed behind him, and the room exhaled. The grand ballroom remained silent long after Zayden Malik had been escorted out. Not the empty kind of silence that follows a speech, but the heavy kind that follows realization. The chandeliers still glowed above, the marble floors still reflected light, yet something fundamental had changed inside the room. The atmosphere no longer belonged to celebration. It belonged to understanding. Alina stood at the center of it all.
Calm. Composed.
Unmoving. The torn edge of her dress still rested at her shoulder, but it no longer defined her. If anything, it had become a symbol, not of humiliation, but of endurance, of restraint in the face of chaos. Slowly, she turned toward the gathered guests. No one spoke. No one dared interrupt. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried through the room with effortless clarity. Tonight was not about power, she said evenly. It was about perception. A pause. No movement. Only listening. People often assume that strength is loud, she continued, her gaze sweeping across the silent crowd. That authority must be seen to be believed. That respect is something given based on appearance, status, or assumption. She took a slow step forward. But real strength, she added, does not announce itself. The room remained still. Even the staff, even the executives, even those who had witnessed everything from the beginning, listened without interruption. Alina's expression softened slightly, not in vulnerability, but in reflection. Respect is not a privilege you take, she said. It is something you offer, before you understand who is standing in front of you. A faint shift moved through the crowd. Some lowered their eyes. Others exchanged quiet, uncomfortable realizations. The lesson was not being imposed. It was being recognized. She adjusted the fabric at her shoulder one final time, not to hide the damage, but to acknowledge it. Then she continued, her tone steady once more. I do not expect tonight to be forgotten, she said, but I hope it is understood. A brief silence followed. Then slowly she turned away.
No dramatic exit.
No escort of authority. Just movement, measured, intentional, dignified. As she walked toward the grand doors, the room instinctively parted. Not out of fear this time, but respect. A respect earned not through force, but through composure under it. The doors opened. Cool night air spilled into the ballroom, breaking the stillness behind her. And, before stepping out completely, Alina paused just once. Not to look back, but to leave her final presence in the space. Then she disappeared into the night. And the ballroom, once filled with power, noise, and arrogance, was left with something far more permanent than silence. Reflection.